I'm Maya Sterling, 29, a senior marketing analyst who thought I'd built something real at Morrison Associates. This morning, I sat in the conference room as HR publicly humiliated me, listing fabricated performance issues while my colleagues watched in stunned silence. The betrayal cut deep, not just from the company, but from my manager who'd been sabotaging me for months. But as security was called to escort me out, the conference room door opened, and our CEO walked in with a question that changed everything. "Why are you firing my partner?" The room went dead silent. You see, there was something about my life and my relationship that I'd kept private for good reason. What happened next would expose the truth about workplace discrimination, personal boundaries, and the power of standing up for what's right. If you've ever felt targeted at work or had to keep parts of your life private, like and subscribe for more stories of justice and empowerment. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Julian's voice cut through the conference room like a blade, and I watched as every face turned from me to him, then back to me, processing what they'd just heard. Partner. The word hung in the air like smoke. After a fire.my employee badge, the one I'd worn proudly for 3 years, suddenly felt heavy against my chest. It represented everything I'd worked for, every late night, every successful campaign, every moment I'd proven myself worthy of being here. Now it was about to be stripped away, and everyone knew why Julian cared. I could feel my cheeks burning. This wasn't how I'd imagined our relationship becoming public. Not like this, not as a rescue operation in front of the entire marketing team and half the executive staff. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years ensuring no one could accuse me of sleeping my way to the top, only to have that very relationship exposed in my moment of greatest professional vulnerability. Julian stood in the doorway, his usually composed demeanor cracked just enough to reveal the storm beneath. His eyes found mine for a split second, and I saw something there I'd never seen before, a mixture of fury and protectiveness that made my heart race despite everything. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice deadly calm as he addressed Patricia from HR. "Why are you firing my partner?" Patricia's face had gone completely white. The termination papers in her hands were trembling slightly, and I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to salvage this situation. She'd been so confident just moments ago, reading off her list of fabricated performance issues like she was delivering a verdict. "Mr. Blackwood, we had no idea about your personal relationship with Miss Sterling," she stammered. "This termination is based solely on performance metrics and performance metrics?" Julian's voice rose just a fraction, but in the deadly quiet of the room, it might as well have been a shout. "Maya Sterling has the highest client satisfaction ratings in the department. She's generated more revenue in the past year than any other analyst. So I'll ask you again, what performance issues?" I wanted to disappear. I wanted to melt into the floor and never face any of these people again. But I also felt something else stirring in my chest, a fierce gratitude that someone was finally fighting for me, even if it meant exposing the secret we'd guarded so carefully. My colleague Jason, who'd been sitting across from me just minutes ago as they read my supposed failures aloud, was staring at me with his mouth slightly open. Next to him, Sarah from accounting was frantically whispering something to her neighbor. The security guard who'd been called to escort me out stood frozen by the door, clearly unsure whether his services were still needed. "Furthermore, Julian continued, stepping fully into the room, "I'd like to know who initiated this termination and on what grounds. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like someone has been deliberately targeting one of our most valuable employees." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia's eyes darted toward the corner where my manager, Rachel, had been standing with her arms crossed, looking smugly satisfied just moments before. Now Rachel looked like she wanted to disappear through the wall. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and humiliation. For months, I'd been questioning myself, wondering if I was paranoid, if I was imagining the subtle sabotage and the way my work kept getting undermined. Now, with Julian's words hanging in the air and Rachel's guilty expression, I realized I'd been right all along, but the cost of being right was higher than I'd ever imagined. 2 years ago, I never could have imagined I'd be standing in this conference room, watching my professional life implode while my secret relationship became public spectacle. It all started at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, an event I'd attended as a volunteer coordinator, not as an employee of Morrison Associates. I remember the moment I first saw Julian across the crowded ballroom. He was standing near the silent auction display, studying a piece of artwork with genuine interest rather than the performative charity engagement I'd grown accustomed to seeing at these events. When he caught me watching him, he smiled, not the practiced smile of a CEO working the room, but something real and unguarded. "Are you bidding on this piece?" he'd asked, gesturing to the painting. "I can't afford it," I'd laughed, "but I helped the artist get it donated. She's a patient at the children's ward." That conversation lasted 3 hours. We talked about art, about the importance of giving back, about our dreams and fears. He never once asked what I did for work, and I never offered. For those precious hours, we were just Julian and Maya, two people who'd found something unexpected in each other. When I'd applied for the position at Morrison Associates 6 months later, I'd done so based on merit alone. My MBA from Northwestern, my 3 years of experience at a boutique marketing firm, my portfolio of successful campaigns, none of that had anything to do with the man I'd been quietly dating. The original job application I'd submitted was pristine, every qualification earned through hard work and dedication. Julian and I had both been shocked when I walked into my first day of orientation and saw him standing at the front of the room, delivering the welcome address to new hires. The look that passed between us could have powered the building, but we both knew instantly that this complicated everything. "We need to talk," he'd said simply when he caught me after the session that evening, over dinner at a quiet restaurant far from the office. We'd made our decision. If we were going to continue seeing each other, it had to be completely separate from work. No special treatment, no public displays, no hint that we were anything more than CEO and employee. "I want you to succeed here," Julian had said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "But I need you to succeed on your own merits. If anyone ever found out about us, it would diminish everything you've accomplished." I'd agreed wholeheartedly. I'd watched too many capable women have their achievements questioned because of their relationships. I wouldn't let that happen to me. So we'd built walls between our personal and professional lives, walls that had just come crashing down in the most public way possible. For 2 years, I'd worked twice as hard as anyone else, stayed later, delivered better results, all to prove that I deserved my place at Morrison and Associates. I'd turned down dinner invitations from colleagues to avoid questions about my personal life. I'd deflected Julian's attempts to give me high-profile projects that might have advanced my career faster. I'd even avoided being seen talking to him casually in the hallways. The sacrifice had been worth it, or so I'd thought. I'd earned my promotions, my raises, my reputation. Every achievement in my personnel file was mine alone. When I'd been promoted to senior analyst last year, I'd felt a fierce pride knowing that no one could question whether I'd earned it, but now, looking at the faces around this conference room, I realized how naive I'd been. All those walls we'd built, all those careful boundaries we'd maintained, they'd just been demolished in one sentence. From now on, everything I'd accomplished would be viewed through the lens of my relationship with Julian. The worst part was that I'd done nothing wrong. My work spoke for itself. My client reviews were stellar. My campaigns had generated millions in revenue. Yet here I was, being terminated for fabricated performance issues, and the only thing standing between me and professional ruin was the man I'd been so careful to keep separate from my career. Julian had always respected our boundaries. He'd never once used his position to help me, never given me information I shouldn't have, never made our relationship visible in any way. If anything, he'd been more distant with me at work than with other employees, bending over backward to avoid any appearance of favoritism. Now I wondered if that distance had actually hurt me. If people had seen him treat me with professional coolness and interpreted it as dislike rather than discretion. If his attempts to be fair had actually made me more vulnerable to the kind of sabotage I'd been experiencing. The irony was bitter. I'd spent 2 years proving I didn't need his protection, only to discover that I'd needed it all along. The sabotage had started so subtly that I'd almost missed it. Looking back now, I could trace it to exactly 3 months ago, when Rachel Bennett had overheard Jenna from accounting mention seeing Julian and me at a coffee shop downtown on a Saturday morning. "That's interesting," Rachel had said, her voice carrying just a hint of something I couldn't quite identify. "Maya and our CEO, having coffee together on the weekend." I'd been walking past the break room when I heard my name, and I'd frozen just outside the doorway. Jenna had laughed it off, saying it was probably just a coincidence, that downtown was full of coffee shops. But I'd seen the look in Rachel's eyes, calculating, hungry for information. Rachel had been my manager for 8 months at that point, ever since she'd transferred from the Boston office. She was ambitious, sharp, and had made it clear from day one that she intended to climb the corporate ladder quickly. At 35, she was only 6 years older than me, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd fought for every promotion she'd ever received. What I hadn't realized was how deeply it bothered her that I, someone she saw as junior to her in every way, seemed to have caught the CEO's attention. The email chain I would eventually discover painted a picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and professional insecurity. The first sign of trouble came the following Monday. I'd submitted a comprehensive marketing proposal for our biggest client, Meridian Tech, the previous Friday. It was solid work, a 3-month campaign that would position their new software launch perfectly for the fall market. I'd spent weeks researching their target demographics, analyzing competitor strategies, and crafting messaging that would resonate with their audience. When I arrived at work Monday morning, Rachel was waiting at my desk with a frown. "Maya, I need to talk to you about the Meridian proposal," she said, holding up a printed copy covered in red ink. My stomach dropped. "Is there a problem?" "Several problems, actually. The demographic analysis seems incomplete, and the budget projections don't align with what the client requested." She handed me the marked-up document. "I'm going to need you to start over." I stared at the pages, confused. The demographic analysis was thorough. I'd pulled data from 3 different research firms and cross-referenced it with Meridian's own customer surveys. The budget was exactly what they'd outlined in their brief. "Rachel, I'm not sure I understand. This data is comprehensive, and the budget matches their specifications exactly." Her smile was thin. "Maya, I know you've been working hard, but sometimes when we're too close to a project, we miss obvious issues. Trust me on this, the client won't be happy with this version." I wanted to argue, but Rachel was my manager. If she said there were problems, I had to assume she saw something I'd missed. So I went back to my desk and started over, working late into the evening to address every concern she'd raised. The next morning, I submitted the revised proposal, confident that I'd addressed her feedback. An hour later, she was back at my desk. "I'm afraid this still isn't quite right," she said, this time with what looked like genuine regret. "I think maybe Meridian isn't the right fit for your skill set right now. I'm going to reassign this to Marcus." I felt like I'd been slapped. Marcus was good, but he'd been with the company for only 18 months. I had more experience, better client relationships, and a track record of successful tech campaigns. "Rachel, I'd really like another chance to get this right. Meridian has been my account for, I've made my decision, Maya. Sometimes we have to know when to step back and let others take the lead." What I didn't know was that while I was revising my proposal, Rachel had been crafting an email to the Meridian account team, subtly undermining my work and positioning herself as the more reliable option. She described my initial proposal as concerning and suggested that perhaps a more senior team member should handle such an important client. The pattern continued over the following weeks. Projects I'd been working on would suddenly be reassigned due to shifting priorities or resource allocation needs. Client meetings I'd been scheduled to attend would be moved to times when I had other commitments, with Rachel explaining that, "Unfortunately, we can't accommodate everyone's schedule." My confidence began to erode. I started second-guessing every decision, every recommendation, every email I sent. Maybe I wasn't as capable as I'd thought. Maybe the success I'd achieved in my first 2 years had been beginner's luck. The worst part was how Rachel managed to make it all seem like concern for my professional development. She'd pull me aside for coaching conversations, where she'd express worry about my recent performance and offer advice on how to improve. She'd suggest training courses, recommend books on leadership, even offer to mentor me personally. "I see so much potential in you, Maya," she'd say, her voice warm with false sincerity. "I just want to make sure you're reaching it." Meanwhile, my relationship with Julian was becoming strained. I couldn't tell him what was happening at work without revealing how much it was affecting me, and I didn't want him to think I couldn't handle my job. Our carefully maintained professional distance meant I couldn't seek his guidance or support, and our personal time together was increasingly overshadowed by my work frustrations. I started working longer hours, trying to prove myself, trying to regain the confidence and respect I'd once enjoyed. But every success was minimized, every mistake magnified. Rachel had created a narrative about my declining performance, and she was methodically building evidence to support it. What I couldn't see then was how deliberate it all was, how carefully orchestrated. Rachel wasn't just a demanding manager, she was a woman who'd identified a threat to her own ambitions and was systematically eliminating it. By the 6th week of Rachel's campaign, I knew something was seriously wrong. The pattern was too consistent, too deliberate. That's when I started keeping my personal performance journal, a detailed record of every project, every meeting, every interaction that seemed off. I'd learned this habit from my business school professor, who drilled into us the importance of documentation in corporate environments. "Your memory isn't evidence," she'd said. "Paper trails are." The journal became my lifeline. Every morning, I'd update it with the previous day's activities. Client feedback, project timelines, meeting outcomes, email exchanges, everything went into that little leather notebook I kept locked in my desk drawer. The entries painted a disturbing picture. Projects where I'd delivered exactly what was requested, only to be told the scope had changed. Client meetings where I'd received positive feedback, but Rachel later claimed the clients had expressed concerns. Deadlines that seemed to shift without notice, always in ways that made me look unprepared. On Tuesday, I documented a particularly revealing incident. I'd spent 3 days preparing a presentation for Hartwell Industries, one of our mid-tier accounts. The client had specifically requested an analysis of their summer campaign performance and recommendations for Q4. I'd put together 20 slides of data, insights, and strategic recommendations. 10 minutes before the meeting, Rachel pulled me aside. "I've been reviewing your presentation, and I'm concerned about the direction you've taken," she said. Hartwell actually wanted to focus on their digital strategy, not general campaign analysis. I checked my notes. The client brief was clear: campaign performance analysis. But Rachel insisted I was wrong. "I'll handle this meeting myself," she decided. "You can observe and learn." I watched as Rachel delivered a presentation about digital strategy that completely ignored what the client had asked for. Somehow, they loved it. They praised her insights and asked for a follow-up proposal. Later, I overheard her telling our director that she'd had to course-correct my work to salvage the client relationship. But here's what I documented that she didn't know. I'd recorded our conversation about the project scope, and I had the original client brief with their signature. The evidence was right there in my journal. Another entry detailed the Henderson Motors incident. I'd been managing their account for 8 months, building a strong relationship with their marketing director, Lynn. Our campaigns had consistently exceeded their KPI targets. Then suddenly, Lynn started seeming distant during our calls. "Is everything okay with our partnership?" I finally asked during one particularly cold conversation. "I thought you knew," Lynn said, confusion evident in her voice. "Rachel reached out last week. She said you were being reassigned and that she'd be our primary contact going forward." I had received no such notification. When I confronted Rachel about it, she acted surprised. "Oh, didn't I mention that? I thought it would be good for you to focus on some smaller accounts while you work on your presentation skills. Henderson is quite demanding." My journal entry for that day included Lynn's contact information and a detailed timeline of our successful partnership. I also noted that Rachel had never mentioned any issues with my presentation skills in any of our previous conversations. The most damaging entry came 3 weeks later. Rachel had been building a case that I struggled with time management and meeting deadlines. She'd point to projects that were delivered late, always with a concerned expression and suggestions for improvement. What she didn't know was that I'd started timestamping my email submissions. My journal showed that I'd actually delivered every project on time, but Rachel had been sitting on my submissions for days before forwarding them to clients or internal stakeholders. The Hamilton Group proposal was the smoking gun. I'd submitted it at 2:47 p.m. on Tuesday, exactly 48 hours before the deadline. Rachel forwarded it to the client at 4:15 p.m. on Thursday, 15 minutes past the deadline. Her email to me expressed disappointment about my continued tardiness and suggested I might benefit from time management training, but I had the original timestamp. I had proof. As my journal grew thicker, my isolation at work became more pronounced. Colleagues who used to grab coffee with me started keeping their distance. Invitations to after-work gatherings stopped coming. I could see them whispering sometimes, and I knew they were discussing my apparent decline. The worst part was doubting myself despite the evidence. Rachel was so skilled at gaslighting that even with documentation, I sometimes wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe I really was struggling. Maybe my perception was skewed, but the journal didn't lie. Pattern after pattern, incident after incident, it told the story of a deliberate campaign designed to destroy my reputation and my confidence. What I still didn't understand was why. What had I done to deserve this? What threat did I pose to Rachel that required such elaborate sabotage? The answer would come later, hidden in the deleted emails that IT would eventually recover. But for now, all I had was my journal and the growing certainty that someone was trying to end my career. The anonymous complaint letter arrived on a Thursday morning in March. I never saw it, of course. It went directly to HR and the executive team. But I felt its impact immediately when Patricia from HR called me for an informal discussion about my workplace conduct. Rachel had crafted the letter perfectly. It alleged that I'd been using my personal connections to receive preferential treatment, that I'd been unprofessional with clients, and that my recent work quality had declined significantly. The letter was typed and signed, and claimed to represent multiple concerned colleagues who were afraid to come forward publicly. "We take all workplace concerns seriously," Patricia explained during our meeting. "I want you to know this isn't an accusation, we're simply gathering information." But it felt like an accusation. Patricia's questions were pointed, specific. Had I ever received special treatment from leadership? Had any clients expressed dissatisfaction with my work? Was I aware that some colleagues felt I wasn't pulling my weight? I answered honestly. No special treatment. Client feedback had been positive. I wasn't aware of any colleague concerns, though I'd noticed some distance recently. "Well, we'll be conducting a thorough review," Patricia said. In the meantime, please be mindful of maintaining professional boundaries. Professional boundaries. The phrase felt like a warning, though I couldn't understand why. What I didn't know was that Rachel had been planting seeds for weeks. Casual comments about my attitude in team meetings. Suggestions that maybe I was overconfident about my abilities. Questions about whether anyone else had noticed my changes in behavior. She'd been particularly clever with Marcus, my ambitious colleague who'd been eyeing my accounts. During their coffee breaks, she'd wonder aloud whether I was really committed to my role anymore. She'd mention how distracted I seemed, how my presentations lacked their former polish. I'm worried about Maya, she'd confide to Sarah from accounting. She seems to be struggling, but I don't think she realizes it. The investigation that followed was biased from the start. Patricia interviewed my colleagues, but she asked leading questions based on Rachel's complaints. Have you noticed any decline in Maya's work quality, rather than how would you describe Maya's recent performance? My stress levels skyrocketed. I'd come home to Julian exhausted and anxious, but I couldn't tell him what was happening. Our rule about keeping work separate had never felt more constraining. He could see something was wrong, but I deflected his questions. Just busy season, I'd say, forcing a smile. Julian was facing his own impossible situation. As CEO, he had to trust his managers and HR department to handle employee issues fairly. He couldn't interfere in personnel matters, especially not for someone he was personally involved with. The conflict of interest would be enormous, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he'd glance at me during company meetings with barely concealed concern. He knew something was wrong, but his hands were tied by the very boundaries we'd created to protect us both. Rachel sensed victory approaching. Her emails became more formal, more documented. She started copying HR on communications about my performance concerns. She scheduled meetings about my development needs, and sent follow-up emails summarizing our discussions. Everything was being documented, but only her version of events. My journal captured the truth, but it remained locked in my desk drawer. I was documenting my own defense, but I didn't know I was on trial. The final piece fell into place when Rachel suggested that my recent struggles might be affecting team morale. Maybe Maya needs some time to refocus, she told Patricia. A fresh start might be best for everyone. The stage was set. The anonymous complaint provided the justification. The investigation would provide the evidence. And Rachel would provide the solution, my removal. I walked into that conference room on a Tuesday morning thinking I was attending a routine team meeting. I had no idea I was walking into my own execution. I woke up that Tuesday morning with no idea it would be my last normal morning at Morrison Associates. The coffee cup I grabbed from my kitchen cabinet, my favorite blue ceramic mug with the chip on the handle, would become a symbol of the ordinary life I was about to lose. Julian had already left for an early breakfast meeting with potential investors. He'd kissed me goodbye in the dark, whispering that he'd be back in the office by 10. I'd mumbled something about seeing him later. Still half asleep, not knowing those would be our last private words before everything changed. My morning routine was automatic. Shower, coffee, check emails on my phone while getting dressed. Nothing seemed unusual. A few project updates, a reminder about the quarterly budget review, the standard Tuesday morning flow of corporate communication. The drive to work was peaceful. I'd been feeling slightly more optimistic lately, thinking maybe the worst of whatever had been happening with Rachel was behind us. My last few projects had gone well, and I'd been building a good relationship with a new client. Perhaps the investigation Patricia mentioned would clear the air and we could all move forward. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into the office. The usual morning chatter seemed muted. Jason, who normally called out a cheerful greeting from his cubicle, barely looked up when I passed. Sarah from accounting gave me a strange, almost pitying smile that I couldn't interpret. Morning, Maya, she said softly, like she was speaking to someone who was sick. Even the receptionist seemed uncomfortable when I smiled and asked about her weekend. Her response was clipped, professional in a way that felt forced. I settled at my desk and opened my laptop, trying to shake off the strange atmosphere. Maybe everyone was just tired. Tuesday mornings were often slow after busy Mondays. Rachel appeared at my cubicle around 9:30, wearing an expression I couldn't read. Maya, I need you in conference room B at 10 o'clock, she said. Team meeting. Sure, I replied, glancing at my calendar. I don't see it scheduled, but it's a last-minute addition. Very important. Her tone was oddly formal, like she was reading from a script. I nodded and went back to my work, though something about her demeanor nagged at me. Rachel had been more distant lately, but this felt different. Clinical. At 9:45, I gathered my notebook and pen, assuming we'd be discussing upcoming projects or reviewing the quarter's performance. I'd prepared a brief update on my current accounts, just in case. The walk to conference room B felt longer than usual. My heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing in hallways that seemed unusually quiet. When I reached the conference room, I paused outside the door, hearing multiple voices inside. That should have been my warning. Team meetings with Rachel typically included 4 or 5 people. This sounded like a much larger group. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. The sight that greeted me was like walking into a nightmare. The room was packed: HR representatives, several colleagues, people from other departments I barely knew. All eyes turned to me as I entered, and the conversation stopped abruptly. Patricia from HR sat at the head of the table with a folder in front of her. Rachel stood to one side, her face carefully neutral. The security guard by the door was the detail that finally made my stomach drop. "Maya, please have a seat," Patricia said, gesturing to a chair that had been placed facing the group. I sat down slowly, my mind racing to understand what was happening. This wasn't a team meeting. This was something else entirely. "Thank you all for being here," Patricia began, opening her folder. "We're here today to address some serious performance concerns regarding Maya Sterling." The words hit me like a physical blow. Performance concerns. Public forum. Witnesses. My favorite coffee mug was still sitting on my desk, probably growing cold. I'd left it there thinking I'd be back in an hour to finish my morning routine. I had no idea I'd never drink from it again. The conference room felt like a courtroom, and I was the defendant who'd just learned about the trial. Patricia had a witness list in front of her, actual names of my colleagues who'd been summoned to watch my professional execution. "Maya Sterling," Patricia began, her voice carrying the authority of an official proceeding, "we've conducted a thorough investigation into multiple complaints regarding your performance and conduct." I could feel 14 pairs of eyes on me. Jason from my team sat in the corner, looking deeply uncomfortable. Sarah from accounting kept glancing at the door like she wanted to escape. Marcus, who'd benefited from my reassigned accounts, stared at his hands. "The investigation has revealed consistent patterns of declining work quality, missed deadlines, and unprofessional behavior toward clients and colleagues," Patricia continued, reading from her prepared statement. Each word felt like a slap. Declining work quality? My campaigns had consistently exceeded targets. Missed deadlines? I'd been delivering early until Rachel started sitting on my submissions. Unprofessional behavior? I'd never received a single client complaint. Specifically, the Meridian Tech proposal submitted in January was deemed inadequate by management and required complete revision. Patricia's voice was steady, factual, devastating. "The Henderson Motors account experienced communication breakdowns under your management. The Hamilton Group proposal was submitted past deadline, resulting in client dissatisfaction." I wanted to scream. Every single allegation was either false or deliberately distorted. The Meridian proposal had been solid. Rachel had manufactured problems that didn't exist. Henderson Motors had been thriving under my management until Rachel secretly reassigned herself. The Hamilton Group deadline had been missed because Rachel had deliberately delayed forwarding my submission, but I sat there, silent, as Patricia systematically destroyed my reputation in front of my peers. "Furthermore," she continued, "anonymous reports suggest that you may have been leveraging personal relationships for preferential treatment, creating an unfair advantage and undermining team morale." The room somehow got quieter. This was the nuclear option, the suggestion that I'd slept my way to whatever success I'd achieved. I could see the understanding dawn on several faces, the pieces clicking together in their minds. "Based on these findings," Patricia announced, "Morrison Associates has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. Terminate. Immediately. In front of everyone. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings," she added, as if I might steal office supplies on my way out. I found my voice finally, though it came out smaller than I'd intended. "I'd like to address these allegations. There are misunderstandings here that I can clarify." "The decision has been made," Patricia cut me off. "This meeting is to inform you of the termination, not to debate the findings." Rachel spoke for the first time since I'd entered the room. "Maya, I know this is difficult, but the company has to make decisions based on performance metrics and team feedback." Her tone was perfectly modulated, sympathetic but firm, disappointed but professional. She sounded like a manager who'd tried everything to help an underperforming employee and was finally forced to make a hard decision. I stared at her, this woman who'd systematically destroyed my career while pretending to mentor me. She met my gaze with what looked like genuine regret, and I realized how skilled she was at this performance. "If you have any questions about your final paycheck or benefits, you can contact HR," Patricia said. "Security is here to help you gather your things." "Help me gather my things?" Like I was a criminal being processed. The security guard, a kind-faced man named Tom who'd always smiled when he saw me in the elevators, looked embarrassed as he stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you're ready?" I wasn't ready. I would never be ready for this moment, this public stripping away of everything I'd worked for. But I stood up anyway, my legs unsteady, and prepared to walk out of that room in front of everyone who'd just witnessed my professional death. That's when the conference room door opened, and Julian walked in. "What's going on here?" he asked. His voice cutting through the thick silence. Patricia looked up, clearly not expecting the CEO to interrupt her proceedings. "Mr. Blackwood, we're conducting a termination meeting for Maya Sterling. Performance issues." Julian's eyes swept the room, taking in the crowd of witnesses, the security guard, my stricken face. His expression shifted from confusion to something much more dangerous. "Why are you firing my partner?" The question detonated in the silence like a bomb. The emergency meeting notes Julian had scribbled on his way to the conference room lay forgotten in his jacket pocket. He'd rushed from his investor breakfast when his assistant mentioned seeing security heading to conference room B, but nothing could have prepared him for walking into my public execution. "Partner?" Patricia's voice cracked on the word. The color drained from her face as she realized the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Julian stepped fully into the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. Every person who'd been watching my humiliation was now staring at him, trying to process what they'd just heard. "Maya Sterling and I have been in a relationship for 2 years, he said, his voice steady despite the earthquake he was creating. "So I'll ask again, why are you firing my partner?" I felt simultaneously grateful and mortified. Grateful that someone was finally standing up for me, mortified that our carefully guarded secret was being exposed in the worst possible way. 2 years of professional discretion, destroyed in one sentence. Rachel's face had gone completely white. She'd orchestrated this entire termination based on the assumption that I had no protection, no one who would question her narrative. The last thing she'd expected was for the CEO himself to walk in and claim me. "Mr. Blackwood," Patricia stammered, "we had no knowledge of your personal relationship. This termination is based purely on performance metrics and workplace conduct." "Performance metrics?" Julian's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Maya Sterling has the highest client retention rate in the marketing department. Her campaigns generated $2.3 million in revenue last quarter alone. Her client satisfaction scores are consistently above 90%. He rattled off statistics that even I didn't know he'd been tracking. Despite our careful separation of personal and professional lives, he'd been paying attention to my work, noting my achievements. "Moreover," he continued, "I've reviewed the quarterly reports. Maya's performance has been exemplary. So what exactly are these performance issues you're citing?" Patricia shuffled through her papers, looking increasingly desperate. "We've documented several incidents of missed deadlines, client complaints, and show me the documentation." The simple command hung in the air. Julian wasn't asking, he was demanding, using the full authority of his position. "I want to see every piece of evidence you've used to justify this termination. Every client complaint, every missed deadline, every performance review. Right now." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Patricia glanced at Rachel, who seemed to have shrunk into herself. Some of my colleagues were looking between Julian and me with dawning understanding, pieces clicking into place. "Furthermore," Julian said, "I want to know who initiated this termination process and why it's being conducted as a public spectacle rather than a private personnel matter." His eyes swept the room, taking in the witnesses, the humiliating setup. Whose decision was it to turn an employee termination into a public event? I could see him calculating, understanding that this wasn't standard procedure. Normal terminations happen privately, with dignity. This had been designed to maximize humiliation. "Mr. Blackwood," Rachel finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "As Maya's direct supervisor, I initiated the performance review process based on legitimate concerns about—" "What concerns?" Julian cut her off. "Be specific." The room waited. Rachel's mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't immediately fall apart under scrutiny. "I think," Julian said quietly, "we need to pause this proceeding immediately. Patricia, please escort everyone except Maya and Rachel out of this room. Now." As colleagues filed out, shooting curious glances over their shoulders, I remained frozen in my chair. The secret Julian and I had guarded so carefully was now public knowledge. By tomorrow, everyone in the company would know that the CEO was dating the senior marketing analyst who'd just been terminated for performance issues. The irony was devastating. We'd kept our relationship secret to protect my career, only to have it exposed at the moment my career was being destroyed. Julian waited until the room cleared, then turned to Rachel with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, and utterly unforgiving. Now, he said, let's discuss what really happened here. Julian's CEO authority letter was drafted within the hour. Written on official letterhead and signed with his full title, it suspended all termination proceedings and ordered an immediate, comprehensive investigation into the allegations against me. More importantly, it removed Rachel from any involvement in the investigation process. Until this matter is resolved, Julian announced to the remaining people in the conference room, Maya Sterling remains employed with full access to her position and responsibilities. Any retaliation against her will be considered a serious breach of company policy. Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. This wasn't how employee terminations were supposed to go. CEOs didn't typically storm into HR proceedings and overturn decisions that had already been made. Mr. Blackwood, she said carefully, given your personal relationship with Ms. Sterling, perhaps it would be appropriate to recuse yourself from this matter? Julian's expression didn't change. Patricia, I'm not investigating this matter personally. I'm ordering an investigation. There's a difference. The company will hire an external firm to conduct a thorough, unbiased review of all the allegations. He turned to me, and for the first time since entering the room, his professional mask slipped slightly. I could see the concern in his eyes. The anger on my behalf, but also something else, uncertainty about how to handle this impossible situation. Maya, I want you to compile every piece of documentation you have regarding your work performance, client relationships, and any interactions that might be relevant to these allegations. Everything. I nodded, thinking of my performance journal. Locked in my desk drawer. I've been keeping detailed records. Good. You'll provide those to the external investigators. He looked back at Patricia. I want the name of the investigative firm by end of business today. I want interviews scheduled with every person who made allegations or provided information for this termination decision. Rachel finally found her voice. Julian, Mr. Blackwood, I understand you want to protect Maya, but the performance issues are well documented. Sometimes personal feelings can cloud professional judgment. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Julian turned to Rachel with a look that could have frozen water. Ms. Bennett, you're right that personal feelings can cloud professional judgment. That's exactly what we're going to investigate, whose personal feelings influenced this decision and why. Over the next 3 days, the external investigation firm, Meridian Consulting, specialists in workplace disputes, interviewed every person involved in my termination. They reviewed email communications, client feedback, project timelines, and performance metrics. What they found was damning, but not for me. My documented performance was exemplary. Client testimonials were overwhelmingly positive. Project delivery records showed consistent on-time completion. The anonymous complaint letter that had triggered the investigation contained allegations that couldn't be substantiated with evidence. More troubling, the investigators discovered that several key pieces of evidence against me had been misrepresented or taken out of context. The Meridian Tech proposal that Rachel claimed was inadequate had actually received client approval before she forced revisions. The Henderson Motors communication issues were traced to changes in account management that I hadn't been informed about, but the real breakthrough came when the IT department, at the investigators' request, began recovering deleted emails from the company server. Corporate policy required all electronic communications to be archived, but individual users could delete messages from their personal inboxes. What they found in Rachel's deleted emails was a smoking gun. Maya, Julian called me into his office on Friday afternoon. The investigators want to share some preliminary findings with us. I sat across from his desk, acutely aware that this was the first time we'd been alone together since our relationship had become public knowledge. The dynamic between us felt strange, part professional, part personal, all complicated. The investigation is revealing some concerning patterns, he said carefully. It appears that several allegations against you were fabricated or manipulated. The investigators have found evidence of deliberate sabotage. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by anger. Rachel, I said. It wasn't a question. We can't draw conclusions yet, Julian said, though his expression suggested he'd already drawn plenty. But Maya, I need you to know, I had no idea any of this was happening. If I had suspected that someone was targeting you, you couldn't have interfered, I finished. We both know that. If you'd tried to protect me, it would have made everything worse. He leaned back in his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Maybe. But watching you go through this, knowing I could have helped but didn't, it's been hell. The investigation was far from over, but already it was clear that my termination had been based on false premises. The question now was whether we could prove deliberate misconduct and what consequences Rachel would face for her actions. More immediately, we had to figure out how to move forward as both colleagues and partners in a company where everyone now Knew about our relationship, the secret we'd protected so carefully was gone forever. The only question was what we'd build in its place. The deleted email recovery process took 3 days. Rachel had been thorough in her deletions, but corporate servers maintain backup archives that require special authorization to access. When the IT department finally produced the recovered files, they painted a picture of calculated malice that shocked even the seasoned investigators. Ms. Sterling, lead investigator Davidson said during our follow-up meeting, what we've discovered goes far beyond workplace conflict. This was a systematic campaign designed to destroy your career. He placed printed copies of the recovered emails in front of me and Julian. The subject lines alone told the story: Maya Sterling, concerns, performance issues, Sterling, confidential, Sterling situation. The first email, dated 3 weeks after Rachel overheard Jenna mention seeing Julian and me at the coffee shop, was sent to a former colleague at Rachel's previous company. I think I've stumbled onto something interesting here, it read. One of my analysts appears to have a personal relationship with our CEO. They're being very discreet about it, but if I can document some performance issues, it might open up some opportunities for advancement. My stomach turned reading it. Rachel had identified my relationship as a vulnerability to exploit, not a conflict to report. Another email, sent to her sister, was even more revealing. The girl I told you about is definitely sleeping with the boss. I've been documenting every mistake she makes, building a case. If I can get her fired, her position will likely open up, and I'm perfectly positioned to step into her accounts. This could be my ticket to senior management. Julian's jaw was clenched. As he read, she was planning this from the beginning. The evidence was overwhelming. Email after email showed Rachel's deliberate strategy: manufacture performance issues, isolate me from colleagues, build a paper trail of complaints, and position herself as the solution to the problems she was creating. Point 1 particularly damaging. Message was sent to Marcus, my colleague who'd benefited from my reassigned accounts. I'm worried about Maya's commitment to the Henderson account. She seems distracted lately. Maybe you could handle their next project to ensure continuity? Marcus had replied agreeing to take on additional responsibilities, apparently unaware he was being manipulated into participating in Rachel's scheme. The anonymous complaint letter that had triggered my termination proceedings was referenced. In an email to herself, a draft where she'd worked out the exact wording to maximize damage while remaining untraceable. Multiple colleagues have expressed concerns, she'd written in the draft. Performance decline, unprofessional behavior, possible conflicts of interest. Each allegation was crafted to be serious enough to warrant termination but vague enough to be difficult to disprove. The most devastating discovery was a series of emails discussing her timeline for my removal. The anonymous complaint should trigger an investigation within a week, she'd written to her sister. I've been documenting issues for 2 months now. Should be enough to justify termination. Then I can pursue the accounts I've been managing in her absence. She'd even researched the company's termination procedures to ensure maximum humiliation. Public termination send a message to other employees, she'd noted. Better to make it a visible consequence. This is criminal, Julian said quietly. She wasn't just undermining your work, she was deliberately sabotaging your career for personal gain. The investigators had found evidence of fabricated client complaints, manipulated deadlines, and false performance metrics. Rachel had been building a fictional narrative about my decline while simultaneously taking credit for my successes. There's more, the investigator continued. We found communications where she discussed leveraging your relationship with Mr. Blackwood as evidence of unprofessional conduct, despite having no proof of any workplace impropriety. She'd planned to use our carefully maintained professional boundaries against us, suggesting that our discretion was actually evidence of guilty behavior. The recovered emails also revealed her jealousy and resentment in stark detail. Some people get everything handed to them, she'd written. Rich boyfriend, easy promotions, clients who love her. Time someone showed her that actions have consequences. Reading her words, I felt a mixture of vindication and disgust. For months, I'd questioned myself, wondered if I was paranoid, if I was imagining the persecution. Now I had proof that it was all real, all deliberate, all designed to destroy me. What happens now? I asked. Now, Julian said, his voice hard with anger. Rachel Bennett answers for what she's done. Rachel's resignation letter arrived by email at 6:47 a.m. on Monday morning, 30 minutes before she was scheduled to meet with Julian, me, and the investigators. It was a masterpiece of deflection and damage control, attempting to frame her departure as a principled stand against workplace favoritism. After careful consideration, it read, I've decided to pursue opportunities elsewhere. Recent events have highlighted fundamental differences in management philosophy that make it difficult for me to continue in my current role. She was trying To control the narrative one last time, positioning herself as the whistleblower who'd been silenced rather than the saboteur who'd been caught, Julian forwarded the email to me with a single word: no. 20 minutes later, Rachel sat across from us in the same conference room where she'd orchestrated my public humiliation just a week earlier. The investigators flanked her on either side, their laptops open to the recovered email evidence. Ms. Bennett, Julian began, his voice professionally cold, "We've received your resignation letter. Unfortunately, we can't accept it at this time." Rachel's composure cracked slightly. "I don't understand. Employees have the right to resign." "Not when they're under investigation for deliberate workplace sabotage," the lead investigator interjected. "Your resignation doesn't eliminate your accountability for actions taken while employed here." I watched Rachel's face as the printed emails were placed in front of her. The color drained from her cheeks as she recognized her own words, her own plan laid out in black and white. "I can explain," she started. "Please do," Julian said. "Explain how you systematically sabotaged Maya's work, fabricated performance issues, and manipulated colleagues to participate in your campaign against her." Rachel's eyes darted between the emails and our faces, calculating her options. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of desperation. "Maya was getting special treatment. Everyone could see it. Someone had to ensure fairness. Special treatment?" I found my voice for the first time since entering the room. "What special treatment? I worked harder than anyone in that department. I delivered better results. I stayed late, took on extra projects, and bent over backward to prove myself." "You were sleeping with the CEO," Rachel shot back, her mask finally slipping. "Do you really expect me to believe your success was based on merit?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. Julian's expression darkened, but I held up a hand. "This was my fight." "You want to talk about merit?" I said, standing up. "Let's talk about the Meridian Tech proposal you claimed was inadequate. The client approved it before you forced unnecessary revisions. Let's talk about Henderson Motors, where I had a 96% satisfaction rating before you secretly reassigned yourself as their contact." Rachel's mouth opened to respond, but I wasn't finished. "Let's talk about the Hamilton Group deadline you claimed I missed, except I submitted that proposal 48 hours early, and you sat on it until after the deadline to make me look incompetent." Each point hit like a hammer blow. Rachel's attempts to justify her actions became increasingly frantic. "I was protecting the company's interests," she insisted. "Personal relationships in the workplace create conflicts of interest. The only conflict of interest here," Julian interrupted, "was your jealousy interfering with your professional judgment. You saw Maya's success and decided to destroy it, rather than earn your own." The investigator pulled out another email. "Ms. Bennett, in this message to your sister, you specifically state that getting Maya fired would open up opportunities for advancement. How does that align with protecting company interests?" Rachel stared at the email, realizing her own words had trapped her. That was taken out of context. What context makes planning someone's termination for personal gain acceptable? I asked. For the first time since I'd known her, Rachel had no smooth response, no manipulative deflection. She sat there, exposed and cornered, finally facing the consequences of her actions. "Your employment with Morrison Associates is terminated immediately," Julian announced. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. You have 15 minutes. Rachel's resignation letter, her final attempt to control the story, lay crumpled and irrelevant on the table. The company-wide apology memo that Julian issued later that day was unprecedented in Morrison Associates' 15-year history. Sent to every employee's inbox and posted on the internal bulletin board, it formally acknowledged the wrongful termination attempt and announced sweeping policy changes to prevent similar incidents. "Morrison Associates failed Maya Sterling," the memo began. "We allowed personal agendas to masquerade as performance management, and we nearly terminated an exemplary employee based on fabricated allegations. This stops now." I read it from my desk, the same desk I'd thought I'd never see again just a week earlier. My blue coffee mug sat where I'd left it that Tuesday morning, though it felt like a lifetime ago. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. The policy changes Julian announced were comprehensive. Anonymous complaints would now require corroborating evidence before triggering investigations. All termination proceedings would be reviewed by external consultants. Managers would receive mandatory training on workplace bias and retaliation. Most importantly, the company established a direct reporting line to the CEO for employees who suspected they were being targeted by their supervisors. If Maya had felt safe coming to me, Julian told the leadership team during their emergency meeting, none of this would have happened. "We need to ensure no employee ever feels that isolated again." But the personal aftermath was more complicated. Then policy changes could address. My colleagues' reactions varied dramatically. Jason from my team stopped by my desk that afternoon, looking genuinely remorseful. Maya, I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I should have spoken up when things didn't seem right. I knew you weren't the person Rachel was describing, but I didn't want to get involved. Others were less direct. Sarah from accounting gave me overly bright smiles and asked how I was holding up, with the kind of careful concern usually reserved for accident victims. Marcus, who'd benefited from my reassigned accounts, avoided eye contact entirely. Some colleagues seemed almost disappointed that the drama was over, that their theories and whispered conversations had been proven wrong. I could feel them watching me, analyzing my interactions with Julian, looking for signs of the favoritism Rachel had convinced them existed. The hardest part was the shift in how people perceived my achievements. I'd spent 3 years building a reputation based purely on merit, but now every success would be viewed through the lens of my relationship with Julian. Had I earned that promotion, or was it because I was dating the CEO? Did clients really love my work, or were they trying to curry favor with Julian through me? Julian and I had a difficult conversation about this the evening after Rachel's termination. Maybe I should look for another job, I said as we sat in his living room, the weight of the week finally hitting me. Start fresh somewhere else where nobody knows about our relationship. Is that what you want? He asked. I want to earn my success, I replied. I want people to respect my work, not question whether I'm sleeping my way to the top. Maya, you've already earned your success. Your performance speaks for itself. Anyone who questions that is choosing to ignore the facts. But facts didn't always matter in workplace politics. Perception could be just as damaging as reality. Over the following weeks, I watched how the company culture slowly shifted. Some changes were positive. People seemed more aware of workplace dynamics, more willing to speak up when they witnessed unfair treatment. Other changes were more challenging, a hypervigilance about relationships and favoritism that sometimes made normal mentoring relationships feel suspect. Julian was scrupulously careful to avoid any appearance of giving me special treatment. If anything, he was more distant with me at work than before, compensating for the relationship everyone now knew about. The investigation's findings were shared with the leadership team, and word of Rachel's systematic sabotage gradually spread through the office. Most people were shocked by the evidence, but some seemed to view it as confirmation of their suspicions about workplace politics. Well, now we know why Maya was so successful, I overheard someone mutter in the break room. The comment stung. Even though I knew it was unfair, the truth was that surviving Rachel's campaign had made me stronger, but it had also made me more guarded. I'd learned that jealousy and ambition could turn colleagues into enemies, that success could make you a target, and that even with evidence and vindication, some people would always question your achievements. But I'd also learned that I could survive betrayal and come out stronger. I'd documented my own defense, stood up for myself when it mattered, and proven that the truth eventually surfaces, even when it's buried under layers of manipulation and lies. The company-wide memo was just paper and policy. The real change would come from how we all chose to move forward. The couples therapy notes from our first session with Dr. Elena Martinez lay between Julian and me like evidence of our relationship's fragility. 3 weeks after Rachel's termination, we sat in her downtown office, trying to navigate the damage that workplace trauma had inflicted on our personal life. The boundary you created between work and home was designed to protect your relationship, Dr. Martinez observed, but it also prevented you from supporting each other during a crisis. Julian shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Maya needed to succeed independently. If I'd interfered, if you'd communicated, I interrupted, I might not have suffered in silence for months. The sessions were brutal in their honesty. We'd spent 2 years building walls between our professional and personal lives, and those walls had nearly destroyed us. While Rachel was systematically undermining my career, Julian had been completely unaware of my struggles. While I was questioning my own competence, he'd been assuming everything was fine because I'd never told him otherwise. I watched you become withdrawn and anxious, Julian admitted during our third session. But I thought it was work stress. I didn't want to pry because of our agreement about boundaries. I felt like I was drowning, I replied. And the person who could have thrown me a lifeline was sitting right next to me every night, but I couldn't ask for help because of rules we'd made to protect your career. The irony was devastating. We'd been so careful to avoid any appearance of workplace favoritism that we'd created a relationship where I couldn't seek support from my partner during the worst professional crisis of my life. Dr. Martinez helped us understand how trauma had affected our communication patterns. My confidence had been so systematically eroded by Rachel's campaign that I'd stopped trusting my own perceptions. I'd questioned whether my relationship with Julian was somehow inappropriate, whether I deserved the success I'd achieved, whether I was as competent as I'd believed. Gaslighting doesn't just affect how you see your work, she explained. It affects how you see everything, including your relationships and your self-worth. Julian was dealing with his own guilt and anger. As CEO, he felt responsible for failing to protect his employees from workplace abuse. As my partner, he felt guilty for maintaining professional distance while I suffered. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, he said during one particularly difficult session. Maya coming home exhausted, being anxious about work meetings, questioning herself constantly. I should have known something was wrong. You couldn't have known, I replied. I hid it from you because I thought that's what we were supposed to do. The sessions forced us to rebuild our communication from the ground up. We had to learn how to share workplace stress without compromising professional boundaries. We had to figure out how to support each other while maintaining the independence that had originally attracted us to each other. One breakthrough came when Dr. Martinez asked us to imagine our future together. Do you want to continue working at the same company? She asked. Julian and I looked at each other, realizing we'd never directly addressed this question. I love my job, I said slowly. I love the work, the clients, the challenges. I don't want Rachel's actions to drive me away from something I've worked so hard to build. And I can't imagine asking you to leave because of my position, Julian replied. That would be letting Rachel win. Then you need to figure out how to be partners and colleagues without compromising either relationship. Dr. Martinez said that we developed new rules. We could discuss general work stress but not specific personnel decisions. Julian could offer emotional support but not professional intervention. I could seek his advice as a partner but not as my CEO. Most importantly, we agreed that if either of us ever felt targeted or unsafe at work again, we would address it immediately, even if it meant temporarily blurring the boundaries we'd established. Your relationship survived a deliberate attempt to destroy it, Dr. Martinez told us during our final session. That suggests it's strong enough to handle honest communication about the challenges you face. The therapy notes we took home weren't just about our relationship, they were a roadmap for rebuilding trust, communication, and mutual support after surviving workplace trauma together. We'd learned that protecting our relationship from external judgment was important, but not at the cost of protecting each other from harm. The boundaries we'd maintained had been well-intentioned but ultimately unsustainable when faced with real crisis. Going forward, we would be more careful about communication and more honest about the challenges we faced. We'd learned that true partnership meant being vulnerable with each other, even when it was professionally complicated. The new company policy manual arrived on everyone's desk 6 weeks after Rachel's termination. At 43 pages, it was comprehensive, addressing everything from anonymous complaint procedures to conflict resolution protocols. But for me, it represented something more significant, a transformation I'd helped shape through my experience. Julian had asked me to lead the policy development committee, a role that felt both healing and empowering. Working with HR, legal counsel, and employee representatives, we'd crafted guidelines designed to prevent anyone else from experiencing what I'd gone through. Maya's situation revealed gaps in our system that we never knew existed, Julian announced. During the company-wide meeting where we introduced the new policies, she's agreed to share her experience to help ensure these changes are meaningful and effective. Standing in front of my colleagues to tell my story was terrifying. These were the same people who'd witnessed my public humiliation, who'd whispered about my relationship with Julian, who'd questioned whether my success was legitimate. 3 months ago, I thought I was losing my mind, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I was experiencing systematic workplace sabotage, but I had no framework for understanding or reporting it. I suffered in silence because I didn't know who to trust or where to turn for help. The room was completely quiet. I could see recognition in several faces, people who'd experienced similar isolation, who'd questioned their own perceptions when faced with workplace manipulation. The new policies aren't just about preventing retaliation, I continued. They're about creating a culture where employees feel safe speaking up when something feels wrong, even if they can't prove it yet. The key innovations included mandatory bystander intervention training, anonymous reporting systems with multiple review levels, and regular check-ins between employees and skip-level managers. Most importantly, we'd established clear consequences for anyone who abused their authority to target subordinates, but policy changes were just the beginning. The real transformation happened in the daily interactions between colleagues. Jason approached me after the presentation. Maya, I want you to know, if I ever see something like this happening again, I'll speak up. I'm ashamed that I didn't before. His words meant more than any policy manual could. Individual accountability was ultimately more powerful than institutional rules. Over the following months, I noticed subtle but significant changes in workplace dynamics. People seemed more aware of power imbalances, more willing to question unfair treatment, more supportive of colleagues who seemed to be struggling. Sarah from accounting started eating lunch with newer employees, making sure they felt included and supported. Marcus, who'd unknowingly participated in Rachel's scheme, became vigilant about ensuring fair project assignments in his new management role. The changes weren't perfect. Some employees remained skeptical about reporting concerns, worried about retaliation despite the new protections. Others seemed to overcorrect, viewing every negative feedback as potential discrimination, but gradually, a new culture emerged, one where employees felt empowered to advocate for themselves and others, where managers understood that their authority came with responsibility for their team's well-being, where success was measured not just by individual achievement but by collective support. I found myself becoming an unofficial resource for employees navigating workplace conflicts. People would approach me quietly, asking how to document concerning behavior or where to seek support when they felt targeted. "You've become the person you needed when you were going through this," Dr. Martinez observed during one of our follow-up sessions. She was right. I'd transformed from victim to advocate, using my experience to help others avoid the isolation and self-doubt I'd endured. The most meaningful change was in how we discussed workplace relationships and favoritism. Instead of whispered speculation and unfounded accusations, we had open conversations about appropriate boundaries, conflict of interest policies, and fair treatment standards. Julian and I had become a case study in how personal relationships could coexist with professional integrity. We were transparent about our relationship while maintaining clear boundaries about business decisions. Our success or failure would be measured by results, not by managing perceptions. "The policy manual is impressive," I told Julian one evening as we reviewed implementation feedback, "but the real change is happening in conversations we'll never hear. When someone speaks up for a colleague, when a manager thinks twice about their motivations, when people choose accountability over convenience." The workplace transformation wasn't just about preventing future Rachel Bennetts. It was about creating an environment where people like me could thrive without fear, where success was celebrated rather than sabotaged, where employees supported each other instead of competing destructively. My experience had become a catalyst for positive change that would benefit employees I'd never meet, in situations I couldn't imagine. That legacy felt more valuable than any individual career achievement. The settlement agreement arrived by certified mail 4 months after Rachel's termination. 23 pages of legal language that formally closed the chapter on workplace sabotage while establishing important precedents for future cases. But, for me, it represented something simpler: acknowledgement that what happened to me was wrong and would have consequences. Rachel had initially tried to fight the company's decision to terminate her for cause. Her lawyer argued that workplace competition didn't constitute harassment and that her emails were taken out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming, and her legal options were limited. Ms. Bennett's actions went far beyond normal workplace rivalry, the company's legal counsel explained during our final meeting. She engaged in deliberate sabotage, document falsification, and systematic harassment designed to destroy a colleague's career for personal gain. The settlement included several key provisions. Rachel would pay financial compensation for the stress and professional damage she'd caused, not just to me, but to the company for the resources spent investigating and remedying her actions. She was also required to attend professional conduct training and would be blacklisted from management positions within our industry network. Most importantly, the settlement established a clear legal precedent. Future cases of workplace sabotage would be prosecuted aggressively, and managers who abused their authority would face both termination and financial consequences. "This isn't just about Rachel," Julian explained to the leadership team. "This is about sending a message that we take employee protection seriously and that there are real consequences for abusing authority." I'd had to make difficult decisions about how far to pursue legal action. Part of me wanted Rachel to face criminal charges for fraud and harassment. Her deliberate falsification of documents and manipulation of company processes certainly warranted serious consequences, but I also wanted to move forward with my life rather than spending years in litigation. The settlement provided accountability without consuming my future with legal battles. "The goal isn't revenge," I told the mediator. "It's justice and prevention. I want other potential saboteurs to know that this behavior has consequences, but I also want to focus on rebuilding rather than destruction." The financial compensation was substantial, enough to acknowledge the professional and personal damage I'd suffered while funding my future career development. I planned to use part of it for additional education and certification programs that would further establish my expertise independently of any workplace relationships. Rachel's letter of acknowledgement, required by the settlement, was brief and clinical. "I acknowledge that my actions toward Maya Sterling were inappropriate and caused professional and personal harm. I take full responsibility for my conduct and commit to professional behavior standards going forward. It wasn't the heartfelt apology I might have wanted, but it was legal admission of wrongdoing that would follow her throughout her career. The ripple effects of the settlement extended beyond our company. News of the case spread through industry. Networks and other organizations began reviewing their own policies for preventing workplace sabotage. I received inquiries from HR professionals asking about our new procedures and how they might implement similar protections. "You've become an unlikely expert on workplace harassment prevention," Julian observed as we reviewed speaking requests from professional associations. The legal resolution also provided closure for my colleagues who'd been affected by Rachel's manipulation. Marcus, who'd unknowingly participated in undermining my work, received written acknowledgement that he'd been manipulated rather than complicit. Jason and others who'd witnessed my treatment received confirmation that their instincts about unfairness had been correct, but perhaps the most significant aspect of the settlement was what it didn't include: any restriction on my ability to share my story. Rachel's lawyers had pushed for confidentiality clauses that would have prevented me from discussing the case publicly. We'd refused, recognizing that my experience could help other employees recognize and report similar treatment. "Your story has power," the mediator had noted. "Silencing it would undermine the very prevention goals the settlement is designed to achieve." The legal resolution marked the end of one chapter but the beginning of another. Rachel would face the consequences of her actions, but more importantly, the systems that had allowed her to operate unchecked were being dismantled and rebuilt. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about creating a framework where future employees would be protected from what I'd experienced. The settlement agreement was legal documentation of that commitment. The promotion letter arrived on my desk 6 months after that devastating Tuesday morning when I'd thought my career was over. Printed on official letterhead and signed by the board of directors, it announced my advancement to senior director of marketing strategy, a position created specifically to recognize my contributions and leadership in workplace transformation. "Maya Sterling has demonstrated exceptional resilience, integrity, and leadership during a challenging period for our organization," the letter read. "Her experience has not only vindicated her professional capabilities but has also driven meaningful improvements in our workplace culture that will benefit all employees." I stared at the letter, remembering how different my life had looked just months earlier. From public humiliation to senior leadership, the journey felt surreal. Julian knocked on my office door, holding his own copy of the announcement. "Congratulations, Director Sterling," he said with a smile that mixed professional pride with personal joy. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," I replied, matching his formal tone before breaking into a grin. "Though I have to say, this feels a bit like whiplash." The promotion wasn't just a personal victory, it was a statement about the company's commitment to merit-based advancement and their confidence in my abilities. The board had specifically noted that the decision was based on my performance metrics, client feedback, and leadership during the policy development process. My new role involved overseeing the marketing department's strategic direction while also serving as an advisor on workplace culture initiatives. It was challenging, meaningful work that leveraged both my marketing expertise and my experience as a workplace advocate. The announcement generated positive responses from colleagues throughout the company. Jason stopped by to congratulate me, looking genuinely pleased. "You earned this," he said simply. "Nobody can question that." Sarah from accounting brought flowers to my desk. "I'm so proud of how you've handled everything," she said. "You could have been bitter or vengeful, but instead you made things better for all of us." Even some of the colleagues who'd initially questioned my success seemed to recognize that my promotion was well-deserved. The months following Rachel's termination had given everyone time to observe my work without the filter of her manipulations. My first major initiative as senior director was implementing a mentorship program designed to support junior employees and prevent the isolation I'd experienced. Pairing experienced staff with newer team members, we created formal channels for guidance, feedback, and advocacy. "The best way to honor what you survived," I told Julian during one of our evening conversations, "is to ensure other people don't have to survive it alone." Julian and I had also made a significant decision about our relationship. After months of therapy and careful consideration, we'd chosen to be open about our partnership while maintaining clear professional boundaries. We disclosed our relationship to the board, established protocols for handling any potential conflicts of interest, and committed to transparent communication about how we navigated both roles. "We spent 2 years hiding," Julian said during the board meeting where we made our announcement. "The experience taught us that secrecy creates vulnerability. Transparency, with appropriate boundaries, is actually stronger protection." The board's response was overwhelmingly supportive. They appreciated our honesty and professionalism, and several members noted that our handling of the crisis had demonstrated the strength of our individual characters and our partnership. My new office came with a view of the city skyline and enough space for the awards and recognition I'd received for my work on workplace culture initiatives. Industry publications had featured articles about Morrison Associates transformation, often highlighting my role in driving change, but the most meaningful recognition came from individual employees who approached me to share how the new policies had helped them address workplace challenges. A junior analyst who'd felt comfortable reporting a supervisor's inappropriate comments. A manager who'd used the bystander intervention training to address unfair treatment of a team member. Small victories that represented the broader cultural shift we'd achieved. You've turned your worst professional experience into your greatest career asset, Dr. Martinez observed during one of our final therapy sessions. You've transformed trauma into leadership. The promotion letter represented more than career advancement, it was validation that authenticity, resilience, and integrity could triumph over manipulation and sabotage. My success was no longer questioned or qualified. It was simply recognized. Standing in my new office, looking at the city beyond my windows, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, pure professional pride, untainted by doubt or defensiveness. I'd earned this position through merit, survived its challenges with grace, and used my experience to create positive change. Rachel's attempt to destroy my career had ultimately made it stronger. The promotion letter was proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and lifting others as you rise. The inspirational speaking engagement program brochure arrived at my desk 1 year after that terrible Tuesday morning in conference room B, printed in elegant navy and gold. It featured my photo alongside a quote that still surprised me to see. Maya Sterling, from workplace trauma to transformational leadership. I'd become someone I never expected to be, a voice for workplace justice and employee empowerment. Standing at the podium of the National HR Conference in Chicago, looking out at an audience of 500 professionals, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me to this moment. The same conference room where I'd nearly lost everything had become the launching point for a mission I'd never imagined. A year ago, I was sitting in a conference room, being terminated for fabricated performance issues while my colleagues watched in silence. I began, my voice steady and strong. Today, I'm here to share how that experience transformed not just my career, but an entire company culture. The audience was attentive, leaning forward as I walked them through the systematic sabotage I'd endured, the investigation that exposed the truth, and the comprehensive changes we'd implemented. But this wasn't just a story of personal survival, it was a roadmap for organizational transformation. The question isn't whether workplace sabotage happens in your organization, I told them. The question is whether you have systems in place to recognize it, address it, and prevent it from destroying careers and crushing spirits. After my presentation, the response was overwhelming. HR directors, executives, and employees approached me with their own stories, their own questions, their own commitment to creating better workplace cultures. I'd found my calling in helping others navigate challenges I'd learned to overcome. Julian watched from the audience, his pride evident as person after person told me how my story had inspired policy changes at their companies. We'd traveled to Chicago together, our relationship now openly acknowledged and professionally respected throughout our industry. 2 years ago, we were so afraid that people would question your success because of our relationship, he said over dinner that evening. Now they question their own workplace cultures because of your leadership. Our relationship had indeed grown stronger through adversity. The couple's therapy notes from Dr. Martinez had evolved into a framework for communication that many of our friends and colleagues had adopted. We'd learned that transparency, appropriate boundaries, and mutual respect could coexist with deep love and professional ambition. Back at Morrison Associates, the transformation was complete but ongoing. The new policy manual had become a model for other organizations, and our employee satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. More importantly, people felt safe speaking up, supported in their growth, and valued for their contributions rather than their connections. My mentorship program had expanded to include partnerships with 3 other companies, creating a network of support for employees facing workplace challenges. The anonymous reporting system had helped identify and address several potential problems before they escalated to crisis levels. Rachel's name had become a cautionary tale in management training programs throughout our industry. Her systematic approach to career sabotage was now studied as an example of how unchecked ambition and jealousy could corrupt workplace relationships. The consequences she'd faced, financial penalties, professional blacklisting, and public acknowledgement of her misconduct, served as a deterrent to others who might consider similar tactics, but perhaps the most meaningful change was in the stories I heard from individual employees. The junior analyst who'd been promoted based on merit rather than favoritism. The manager who'd received support when addressing a toxic team member. The employee who'd felt comfortable reporting harassment. Because they trusted the system would protect them. "You saved my career," a young woman told me after my presentation in Chicago. "I was experiencing gaslighting from my supervisor, but your story helped me recognize it and document it. HR took action, and now I'm thriving in a new role." These conversations reminded me why sharing my story mattered. Every person who felt empowered to speak up, every workplace that implemented better policies, every manager who thought twice about their motivations, these were the real measures of success. As I packed up my materials from the conference, I thought about that coffee mug I'd left on my desk the morning everything changed. Such a small, ordinary object that had come to symbolize the normal life I'd thought I was losing forever. I'd found something better than normal. I'd found purpose in pain, strength in vulnerability, and the power to transform trauma into meaningful change that would outlast my own career. The speaking engagement program was just the beginning. There were more stories to share, more workplaces to transform, more people to empower. Rachel had tried to end my career, but instead, she'd launched my mission. If you've ever felt invisible at work, questioned your own perceptions, or wondered if speaking up would make a difference, know that your voice matters. Your experience has value. Your story could be the catalyst that changes everything for someone else. The conference room where it all began now hosts our monthly employee advocacy meetings. Same table, same chairs, completely different energy. Instead of witnessing destruction, colleagues now collaborate on construction, building a workplace where everyone can thrive. That transformation is possible everywhere. It starts with one person willing to speak their truth, one leader willing to listen, one organization willing to change. It starts with believing that your story, whatever it is, has the power to create the change you wish you'd had when you needed it most.